Anyway, we need grassroots organizations who will support the media and who recognize that the media is important. But I think those other routes, government, we need a friendly government who will maybe even allow rehabilitation of PBS and NPR, and actually possibly even subsidize the democratic media, but maybe a little decentralization of the existing commercial media. That's another point that all the media reformers in the United States pay attention to. There's still pressure to allow the existing media to conglomerate further, which would increase their power. We should be fighting that. But in a more ideal situation, we should be forcing radical decentralization of the commercial media, as well as help encouraging and building up a non-commercial media.
Okay, before I get to your question, I just wanted to make a comment as well. The same charge that I gave to keynote speakers, I didn't want to tell them what I wanted them to talk about in their keynote addresses. I just said, read that paragraph summary of the conference overview and decide what you feel is important. That same charge I gave to a wonderful graphic design student, Nicola from St. Clair College. She read the paragraph and she came up with this logo, which has truth on the top and it goes through the institution, and at the bottom you have other, right? Other. But obviously you look at it from the bottom, and Danny Schechter pointed out the need for us to also think about solutions and in thinking about how the propaganda model could be used perhaps for an alternative political economy of media or other types of facets outside the propaganda model. So I just wanted you to think about how we can perhaps start from the bottom as well and sort of unravel this and get to more truth in media. And by that, I don't mean truth in the abstract sense. I mean, was there over 100,000 people protesting in Washington on February 15, 2003, or was it 10,000, as was originally reported? Was there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or a nuclear program in Iran, or isn't there? So I just wanted to put that out there. And you can ask your question, then Antonia next. Thanks. Sure. And try and scream out because they can read what the rest of.
So my question is, I think everybody in this room sort of has a pretty good understanding of how susceptible our society is to the propaganda. And I was wondering, Professor Chomsky had an interesting comment earlier about how we sort of gained a bit of understanding of propaganda through looking at our society. And I was wondering, how susceptible do you think our society is today to that same sort of hysteria? I mean, with a collapse of our economy, could we be at risk of some sort of, somebody coming up with a leader and saying it's because of these people? And I mean, it seems like we're already susceptible to a form of that. Something at extreme level.
Say Nazi Germany.
Yeah, they were, obviously honestly.
It's a good model to think about. Ryan? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, Germany, quick remembering, was the most, the peak of Western civilization in the 1920s and early 30s.
It's not loud enough.
Can you hear it now? It's back to engineering school. Does that work? Yeah. All right, I'll get about 3 words in. Germany in the 1920s and the early 30s, it's worth remembering, was the absolute peak of Western civilization in the arts, in the sciences, in literature, in philosophy. If you're a student in the United States and you wanted to study, say, physics, philosophy, you went to Germany. Within about 2 or 3 years, it descended into the most extreme barbarism in history. And it wasn't just because of an economic collapse. great, but that wasn't the reason. That's a signal of the susceptibility of any society to sudden descent into barbarism. Actually, there was an article about this of all places in Foreign Affairs, the main establishment journal, by one of the leading historians of modern Germany, Fritz Stern, 2 years ago, I guess. The article is called something like Descent into Barbarism. And he opens his article with a direct response. He could be answering your question. He opens the article by saying that his family were refugees. He's Jewish. His family were refugees from Germany in maybe 1934 or so. They fled because of rising anti-Semitism. He was a child, came to the United States, was able to make a career, ended up a big professor at Columbia, did fine, and so on. He's grateful to his adopted country for everything that they did, for saving them, giving them this wonderful life. But he said, I now fear for my adopted country. Okay. And then he starts going through Germany's sudden descent into barbarism. And if you read it closely, just about everything he's quoting is this paraphrase of a statement from the Bush administration. And it's very conscious. He's saying, yes, this is what can happen. And he ends up by, it's polite, he doesn't say, you guys are facing fascism, but the implication is there for any reader, and he's not the only one. In maybe the most respectable journal in the country, the Journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, very well-known, highly respected constitutional law professor, Sanford Levinson, had an article after the Gonzales torture memos came out, 2002, I guess. There was a leak of some memos in which Gonzales was then the legal advisor to the president, wrote him memos saying that it would be wise for him to rescind the Geneva Conventions because that would reduce the possibility, the likelihood of prosecution. The point is, the kind of torture that the Justice Department was authorizing, they knew were grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, and under U.S. law, U.S. War Crimes Act, now rescinded in the Military Commissions Act, under that law, the people responsible for grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions are susceptible to severe punishment up to the death sentence. So Gonzales recommended that Bush essentially rescind the Geneva Conventions. A lot of that stuff leaked at about that time, and Senator Levinson wrote an article about it, appalled, like all legal authorities were. But he ended up by saying that, he said, the real eminence grise of the Bush administration is Carl Schmitt. Okay, Carl Schmitt was Hitler's legal advisor. It's pretty strong words. So I don't think your question is out of reach, but I also don't think it's likely. I think people here have just won too much freedom over the centuries to give it up very easily. So I think they'll... Pardon?
It'd be too much of a contrast. It would be too much of a contrast.
Look, these victories were won with hard struggle. They were never given. It includes freedom of speech and everything else. They're won, and they're in people's blood and bones. They don't give them up easily. In fact, as bad as it may be now, there have been much worse periods in the United States. What's going on now doesn't even begin to compare with Woodrow Wilson's Shakespeare, for example. In fact, it doesn't even begin to compare with things that aren't talked about because they tell the wrong story, so they're kept under wraps, like COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO was, for those of you who don't know, was a program, a subversive program run by the National Political Police, the FBI, from the Eisenhower into the Nixon administration through 4 administrations, including the 2 main liberal administrations, Kennedy and Johnson. That was a program aimed at destroying all forms of political dissent. The women's movement, the black movements, the New Left, anything you could think of. And it reached pretty far. It reached a direct political assassination, Gestapo-style assassination set up by the FBI of Black Panther organizers. Well, it's pretty serious. We're not facing that kind of thing. And that was not that many years ago. So yeah, it's bad, but it's been a lot worse. My guess is that there's too much resistance for that to happen, no matter what Cheney, Rumsfeld, and others might want.
My favorite American economist was one guy named Thurstein Veblen, who wrote a wonderful book back in 1904 called The Theory of Business Enterprise. And in the last chapter